Hello, and welcome once again to our conversation and discussion. My name is Dion, and this presentation is brought to you by Operation Isaiah 58 Biblical Literacy Institute, where we're reading critically as a righteous act. Welcome once again. I hope you are enjoying your day and your studies. We're going to continue reading chapter 5 of The Great Secrets of Israel, Discoveries Among the Bantus of Africa and the Sacred Meaning of the Song of Solomon, translated according to the African Palaver by the beloved scholar, pastor, and teacher, Elder Thomas Vanda Odimba. Now, before we get started, I kind of like to preface our conversations by bringing out some information of why we do what we do here at the Biblical Literacy Institute and the motivation or impetus behind our endeavors. And as students of the Bible and a lifelong learner personally, I am motivated by the scripture in 2 Timothy chapter 2, verse 15, where it says to study to show thyself approved unto God, a workman that need not be ashamed, rightly dividing the word of truth. And we look up that word study in the dictionary. It means it's the devotion of time and attention to acquiring knowledge on an academic subject, especially by means of books. So we are those students of the Bible. We are not against books. We're not against reading other books, because when you look up the word study in the dictionary, in order to study, you have to use other books. We do consider the Bible as the primary source. So to validate what the Bible has already stated, we will study other books. Now, another important definition of study is a detailed investigation and analysis of a subject or situation. So if we were to insert that into the scripture, it would read something like this: do a detailed investigation and analysis of a subject or situation, especially by means of books, to show thyself approved unto God, a workman that need not be ashamed, rightly dividing the word of truth. So when we look at this language here, investigation and analysis, we know that when you are investigating or analyzing anything, when you're examining or scrutinizing or evaluating or interpreting information, you are entering into the scientific or the critical analytical realm. And that's why we do indeed believe that reading critically and analytically is a righteous act. Another scripture that is the motivation for what we do here at the Biblical Literacy Institute comes from Romans 12:2, where it says to prove what is the good and acceptable and perfect will of God. We are not to be conformed to this world, that we are to be transformed by the renewing of our minds, and that in order so we can prove. And when we look at that word prove in the dictionary, it means to demonstrate the truth or existence of something by evidence or argument. And so it's a testing process, and we are admonished to do this, and also it is also a part of the scientific method. It involves the scientific method. Now, what else why the Bible? Why the Hebrew Bible? Some of us, we're on this journey, and there's been a lot of things that have been said and are being said about the Hebrew Bible. And we're not talking about a religion. We're not into religion or into any religion, but we're into studying. And so we found this information about the Bible. And this book was written by one Vishal Makwaldi, and he titled his book, "The Book That Made Your World: How the Bible Created the Soul of Western Civilization." And so oftentimes we wonder, how did it become great? What were they doing? What did they do? Well, if you continue on in our discussion and conversations, we're going to find exactly what made your world, as the scholar Vishal Makwaldi has stated. Now, he states very clear and emphatically on page 77 that the Bible created a peculiar religious person called the schoolman or scholastic. Okay, so the religious person, is not what you are seeing or experiencing today in these churches. That, back in the day when you were religious, he says that, Mr. Makwaldi says that you were a scholastic, a scholar, if you will. He goes on to say that he used logic as his primary tool to study divinity. No earlier culture had created such a rational man with the intellectual capacity for establishing the foundations of the nation state. So here, drawing your attention to that, this intellectual capacity driven, created by the religious person that the Bible created, the scholar, that, you know, you develop this capacity, this intellectual capacity to establish and found nation states, parliaments, democracy, commerce, banking, higher education, and various literary forms such as novels and history. Now, if you can imagine that the Bible created all that in the West. Now, he goes on to state on page 78 that the scientific, technological, military, and economic successes of the West came from the fact that it became a thinking civilization. Was rationality a coincidence of history, or did the Bible promote rationality because it informed the West that the ultimate reality behind the universe was the rational word logos, and this is a footnote, which we're going to read, of a personal God? It was not, as Indian sages thought, primeval silence, senseless and sound mantra, energy, or impersonal consciousness. So the Bible, he's asking, you know, rhetorically, did it promote rationality? And, you know, we're living in a time and an era and a period where a lot of this foolishness and talk about putting the Bible in the garbage can and throwing the Bible away, and this nonsense about the Bible is a book of myths and fairy tales, when this scholar is saying it's the book that made your world. Now, granted, you know, we understand that in the hands of the wicked, as the Bible states, the Hebrew Bible says that the world has been given over into the hands of the wicked. So what we're doing is we're just taking the Bible out of their hands. That's why we're not promoting any religion. We're taking the Bible out of their hands. Now, he goes on to say that the Greeks used the term logos to refer to the spoken word as well as to the unspoken word, still in the mind of reason. They also used this term to mean, quote, the rational principle that governs all things. And I don't know about you, but whenever I start to read the Psalms and Ecclesiastics and, you know, the other various books, you know, my rationality starts to return. That's me personally. I can speak, this is a personal testimony that I have literally experienced in my personal life, how when you go back and start meditating, like the Bible said, King David in the Psalms, you meditate on his word day and night, your mind starts to come back. Things start to make sense. You know, he said he restores your soul. I mean, I've experienced that. But he's saying that, Mr. Magwadi is saying that the word logos, it means in Greek, the rational principle that governs all things. And in the New Testament, the Apostle John used logos, and John's use of logos became the key to the West becoming a thinking civilization. And he's talking about the book of John in John chapter 1, where he says, in the beginning was the word, and the word was with God, and the word was God. He's talking about the logos. In the beginning was the logos, or in the beginning was the rational principle that governs all things. So why the Hebrew Bible? Some might ask. Well, let's look at another source. You know, this is out of the Norton Anthology of English Literature, and it states here, it stated here, quote, before Christianity, there had been no books. The impact of Christianity on literacy is evident from the fact that the first extended written specimen of the Old English or Anglo-Saxon language is a code of laws promulgated by Ethelbert, the first Christian king. And I've said this before on my other videos that anytime you hear this word Christianity or Christianization or Christendom or conversion, or basically in a nutshell, you know, in analytically, you understand that they started reading the Bible. That's all that means. Whatever it's in your mind, how it looks, at the foundation of this Christianity is this text right here. This is the book, the foundation of this so-called Christianization process. And we've talked about it before, how it was the Bible, the condemnation of chattel slavery, that what most of the abolitionists were Bible-believing so-called quote-unquote Christians. They were Bible-believing, they believed in the Bible, and they was reading the Bible. And the Bible informed them that, you know, your slavery, your chattel slavery is a capital offense in the eyes of the Eternal One, and is sin. And that's what was the theoretical, I would, you know, if you will, the ideology or the gas or the engine that fueled the abolitionist movement. So, you know, we really have to understand, you know, where we are and this Bible, and really know that it's the primary source, and that's why we are why we do what we do. Now, let's continue on with our conversation. We're still in chapter 5, The Great Secrets of Israel by Pastor Thomas Odimba. And this chapter is discussing the presence of Judaism in Black Africa, the priest, the faith, and the temple, migration of the people and the priest of Judaism, migration of the people, migration of Jewish priests to South Africa. The history of this migration, genetic relationships between the priests of Zimbabwe and the Kohens of Europe, and the dispersal of priests and pilgrims from Zimbabwe, attacks from the Sabians, Portuguese, and the German conquest in 1853. So let's begin on page 49. We're going to begin reading So it reads, it is important to remember that at the arrival of Jacob, the religion and its laws as Moses handed them down was not in existence. These came along with Ethiopian, Nubian, and Kenyan communities. The formation of large Jewish congregations of Black Africa, the formation of large Jewish congregations of Black Africa was as a result of massive migration from Arabia, Sahara, and Yemen, of which some races remained in Sudan and many other countries. So there was a community of the Jews in Arabia and Sahara who migrated to Black Africa. And the presence of the remains of the synagogues of the Sahara, Arabia, and Yemen proves, here's that word, proves that there was a concentration of large communities that left Palestine. At the fall, it reads, at the fall of Sahara, arid land in Hebrew, Sahara, or the Sahara of today, the Jewish communities moved from the north to the south, bringing along with them the religion, culture, and names. Footnote 23, this was how they settled at Kahare, arid land of the south, or Kalahari, desert of contemporary times. Okay, the next section is the priests, the faith, and the temple, continuing on page 49. The Temple of Zimbabwe in Southern Africa. Now, the story of the great Temple of Zimbabwe and its pilgrims that was narrated in the oral tradition in Southern Congo corroborates the biblical prophecy of Isaiah chapter 19, verse 19 through 20, which announces the construction of the last Jewish temple in the middle of Africa, whose ruins would remain as a testimony of the presence of God in Africa. Now, remember, Pastor Odimba reminded us that, if people, students, researchers, learners, lifelong learners, whoever you might be, or those that have general literary interest, if you don't take into effect prophecy, if you don't take that into account when you're dealing with the biblical text or the children of Israel, then you might have some problems in understanding or following the narrative, because these people, in addition to being a people of culture and tradition, they are also a prophecy governed. They're part of prophecies. They're prophecy governed people. And so we always have to take the prophecies in consideration to our interpretive practices. Now, it states here in the prophecy in chapter 19 of Isaiah, verses 19 through 20, that, quote, "On that day, there will be an altar to the Lord in the center in the land of Egypt, and a pillar to the Lord at its border. It will be a sign and a witness to the Lord of hosts in the land of Egypt. When they cry to the Lord because of oppressors, he will send them a savior and will defend and deliver them," end quote. So this prophecy was announced 7 centuries before our time, was confirmed by the ruins of Zimbabwe, which was attacked several times without being completely destroyed, as was the case with other Jewish vestiges in Arabia, Medina and Mecca, Sahara and Yemen. They tried to destroy these monuments and the evidence, if you will. The ruins that have been left behind are testimonies to the presence of God, as Pastor Odimba so eloquently stated it. It's their testimonies to the presence of God in Africa. These ruins that have been attacked and have been destroyed by the enemies. Now, he goes on to state, Pastor Odimba, in the Temple of Zimbabwe in Southern Africa, Mach, the German geologist of 1872, was convinced as Hegel during his era, and therefore came out with a hypothesis that the structure in Zimbabwe was the replica of the Temple of Solomon and of the temple the Queen of Sheba lived in. 20 years later, the column of the pioneers of Rhodes penetrated Mashonaland and encamped near these fascinating ruins. Marveled at what they saw, one of them wrote, quote, "Today, the Englishman is in the Ophir country, opening once again the treasures of antiquity. We could expect to see in a few years the image of Queen Victoria printed on gold with which King Solomon adorned his ivory throne and the cedar pillars of his temple," end quote. Now, we want to go look into a little bit of the Temple of Great Zimbabwe. And I think we went over this, so I'm going to go ahead and skip to page 50. And in this section, we are going to discuss, because I went over the Great Temple of Zimbabwe in the last video. So I wanted to skip that and go right into the migration of people and of priests of Judaism. where we will discuss these topics here, this content. Now, on page 50, from Jerusalem, Sahara, Mecca, and Yemen, the migration took place from the north to the south. Okay, so from Jerusalem, Sahara, Mecca, and Yemen, or Palestine. The migration took place from the north to the south, either towards the direction of the Nile or to the oceanic coast. One of the reasons for this migration was commercial, and another was to escape the various attacks. As we already know, the most southern point was the Kalahari. However, the migrations continued from the south to the center, this time along the rivers towards the Congo Basin, and also towards the Great Lakes to the east of Congo. Because of the attacks at that time, this time did not come from the north, but from the Indian Ocean to the east of the Atlantic Ocean, which could be located at the southern eastern end. Okay, so now the migration of the people. The Jewish communities did not penetrate the equatorial forest that extended to the Niger Curve before the Roman and Arab conquest. Between the 7th and 12th centuries, the Jewish and Egyptian communities, which had not crossed the Atlantic Ocean to enter Central America, left the Sahara Desert to take refuge in the equatorial forest and constituted camps that later became villages, big towns, and kingdoms such as Congo with a K, Lunda, Cuba, Missouri, North, and others. So the figure 6, he has the attacks. It's a map. I couldn't pull the map up because it's unique to his document, but it's a map that shows the attacks by the Sabaeans or Herodotus, the Mamelukes, and the Assyrians against the synagogues and Jewish religious centers in Medina, Mecca, and Yemen and Africa. So here is Pastor Odimba demonstrating the migration of the people and the priests of Judaism. So he shows you that the migration from Israel produced the following communities. Okay, then from Ethiopia, here's Ethiopia. Down to South Africa. From Ethiopia down to South Africa. And then west. But he is emphasizing this area of Zimbabwe. They migrated like this, and they went along the Nile. Others went towards the south and to the north to form what is known as the Baganda people. The Aganda is derived from the Hebrew word Goganda. This word was used in Germany to refer to the Jews and was attributed to Hitler's concentration camp and that of Stalin in Kazakhstan. Kar Aganda. In Burundi and down are the people which are known as the Zulu, which means the people that come from heaven. So it goes on to read on page 50, during the partitioning of Africa at the Berlin Conference in 1885, the countries of today came into existence and colonization became established. Due to colonialism, the colonized bore European names. Interestingly, all African countries decided to review their socio-political structure and also reverted to their former names that show their Jewish and Egyptian origin, as can be seen in the names of countries, towns, avenues, rivers, tribes, ethnic groups, and persons. And he's referring to the toponymy that he has in this book. Now, the next section is the migration of Jewish priests to the south of Africa, which is continued on page 50. It reads, oral tradition has not kept reliable souvenirs of the movement of priests from the north to the south of Africa. However, written history, genetics, toponymy, and anthroponymy make it possible for us to observe the traces of an impressive number of believers of Jewish origin all over the sub-Saharan region of Africa. It goes on to read, Pastor Odimba states, quote, the most reliable information appears to be those provided by Arab authors, who intimate that the Jewish communities went to Arabia following the revolt against Rome. Given that Arabia was to the opposite direction of the Roman attacks. Besides, after the Mamelukes occupied Ethiopia and Yemen, the priests and the believers also moved to the south. In one of the oldest Arabic sources, it was affirmed that the escaping Jews joined to the north of Arabia. Some co-religionists who had already settled to join some co-religionists who had already settled there, footnote 25. This is a fact which could validate the theory of massive migration that tapered off over time. It goes on to read that the Talmud acknowledges the flight of 80,000 young priests to the Ishmaelites at the time Jerusalem was attacked, footnote 26. And in talking about Ishmael, it should be recognized that we are referring to an Egyptian by virtue of his mother Hagar, the servant of Sarah, who returned to Egypt and got married to an Egyptian. So he doesn't want us to be confused about when we're talking about your Ishmaelites. Some would have us to believe that the Arabs are the Ishmaelites. But if you do your studying and your research, you will find that we're talking about Egyptians. Okay, and as far as I know, the Arabs do not claim any Egyptian identity. Now, the genetic relationship between the priest of Zimbabwe and the Kohen of Europe, I'm just going to read. And then it's a short section, so I'm just going to read. And it states, in the effort to ascertain the presence of Jewish priests in contemporary Black African population, David Goldstein, population genetics specialist in Oxford University, undertook a genetic study of the Bantus in Zimbabwe who live near the Temple of Solomon. In his findings, which were published in the Science and Life Journal, number 983 of August 1999, page 16, he says, 45% of the Ashkenaz priests and 5% of Sephardic priests currently alive have the Cohen identification mark. Meanwhile, among the ordinary Jewish population, only 3 to 5% of the people tested bear this mark, which is rare or non-existent among non-Jews. What is surprising, however, is that 9% of Limba men and 53% of people from the Bubba clan have this Cohen mark. The word, I think it's Buba or Buba, comes from Huba. It is believed that this same word is the stem of the word Luba in Congo and Yoruba in Nigeria. This is how it is presented in the Hebrew text. Yahuba, Yehuba, 1 Chronicles chapter 7, verse 34, Jehuba in English meaning hidden. And so I just wanted to remind researchers and students about, we must never forget about the Arab slave trade of East Africa that Pastor Odimba is referring to. And so this is a map that generally shows you the trans-Sub-Saharan slave trade to North Africa and the trans-Sub-Saharan slave trade to the Ottoman Empire. And other parts of the Middle East. So this is referred to the East African slave trade over here. And then here, of course, the transatlantic slave trade, which most of us are very much familiar with. And again, just confirms the prophecy in the Bible when Jesus stated that after he died, that they shall fall by the edge of the sword. Okay, talking about the Jews, his people. They were going to be murdered. And they shall be led away, and those that escape the sword will be led away captive into all nations. Slavery. And Jerusalem shall be trodden down of the Gentiles until the times of the Gentiles be fulfilled. So here we see the fulfillment of the prophecy of Israel being led away captive into all nations, as prophesied by Jesus Christ. Now, the next section is the dispersal of priests and pilgrims from Zimbabwe on pages 51 to 52. It reads, the oral tradition of the Bantus has a logical legend about the escape of the priest and tells a coherent story which is confirmed by toponymy and anthroponymy. This legend explains that the Zionists, communally called the Shona or the Siona or Sona, feared the attacks carried out during the 15th century by the Sabaeans and the Portuguese, and also the dreaded slave trade. Footnote 27. It continues on. They thus moved from Zimbabwe. And that's that image that was shown to you where they migrated from Zimbabwe. They moved from Zimbabwe to the northwest to set up Luanda in Angola, the first priestly city in Luanda, the capital of Angola or Golan, currently Angola, which fell in the 16th century as a result of the Portuguese attacks. They moved from Zimbabwe to the south, from southern Tanzania, currently South Africa, whose inhabitants are currently Bantus. Tanzania means God listens. Now, in talking about the attacks by the Portuguese, we have to bring in information about your Pope Nicholas V and the Portuguese slave trade. And this document can be found here. And it documents the early development of Portuguese interest in large-scale slave trafficking out of the West. So the 15th century Iberian legal traditions regulated Christians' treatment of Jews, Muslims, and other Christians, clearly delineating, for example, who was enslavable and who was not. In contrast, the judicial status of people who did not fit these categories was more ambiguous. Legal and philosophical arguments to address this issue began to evolve during the second half of the 15th century, once Portuguese mariners began to return to Iberia with captives acquired in West Africa and West Central Africa. Now, we want to remember that their legislation, their policies, and their practice, they're always involving philosophical arguments to justify whatever it is that they're going to do. And so remember this in addressing the mind and the intellect, that, there are philosophical arguments that are constructed to deal with the reality of humanity. So when we talk about philosophical arguments that were addressing this issue, right? Now, about, slavery. So, the conscience, these philosophical arguments that oftentimes they're dealing with the conscience of man and how man is going to be able to massage his conscience to, one way or the other, to make a decision to do what they want to do or what he or she wants to do. If you following my thought and following me, the Hebrew Bible speaks of this. When it talks about that the weapons of our warfare are not carnal, but mighty through God to the pulling down of the strongholds and casting down imagination. Casting down imaginations, we're talking about intellectual, philosophical arguments. It's no longer about the sword. It's about casting down the reasoning and justifications behind why the wicked do what they do. The wicked, that's what the Hebrew Bible, excuse me, but I oftentimes will use the language of the Hebrew Bible. The Hebrew Bible refers to, there's two people in the world. There's the righteous group, and then there's this wicked group. And then there's certain identifiable characteristics and modes of behavior and actions that you can identify the wicked. And these wicked, they often have come up with, very extensive philosophical arguments. So I don't want to get too bogged down on that, but notably the treatment of Black Gentiles. Now here comes the where they start to deal with this, who these Black folk, they call Black people and Africans, Black Gentiles, right? Was addressed in 1452 and 1455 when Pope Nicholas V issued a series of papal bulls that granted Portugal the right to enslave sub-Saharan Africans. So if you're following and you're connecting the dots with Pastor Odimba, what he's going through, he's showing you that they were not enslaving you because you were a Black person, as indicated by the information that we've gathered so far, that is in fact a lie, because if you look at the research, you will find that there's the areas that were targeted were Jewish communities. Now, so this right to enslave in sub-Saharan Africans, church leaders argued that slavery served as a natural deterrent and Christianizing influence to, quote, barbarous behavior among pagans. Using this logic, the Pope issued a mandate to the Portuguese King Alfonso V and instructed him to invade, search out, capture, vanquish, and subdue all Saracens and pagans whatsoever, and to reduce their persons to perpetual slavery, and to apply and appropriate to himself and his successors the kingdoms, dukedoms, counties, principalities, dominions, possessions, and goods, and to convert them to his and their use and profit. So they didn't make a move without there being a law. They had to do it. It had to be a law that sanctioned this criminal behavior. So you can see, and we're not going to get into this in this discussion, but perhaps in another discussion, that the laws of the pagans, they will come up with legislation and policies that legitimizes criminality. If you can wrap your head around that the laws protect criminal behavior, or it allows one to participate legally in criminal behavior. Crimes against humanity, they call it. So here you have it from Pope Nicholas V and the slave trade. This is the actual document here, the papal bull of Pope Nicholas V of Portugal, January 8th, 1455. Courtesy of the National Archives, National Archives in Lisbon, Portugal. This papal bull legally granted Portugal the right to enslave any and all people they encountered south of Cape Bojador, on the coast of Western Sahara. About midway through the bull, the Pope declares all sub-Saharan Africans henceforth to be held in perpetual slavery. So there you have it. Here it is, Bishop of Rome. And so this is what it looked like in real time. The enslaving of the Semitic Black race in Africa, also known as the Bantus, also known as the Jewish communities, as pointed out by Pastor Odimba, that had settled there. It was actually an anti-Semitic campaign. We were enslaved, as it is indicated by the literature and the research, not because of the color of our skin, but it was an anti-Semitic campaign that was perpetrated by the Hamites, the Hamitic race. Here's an image I found online with, you can see these are the enslaved Black people in the bottom of a ship, in the gull of a ship here. And some have used this scripture to confirm the prophecy of Deuteronomy 28, confirm this picture is used as to confirm this prophecy, literally and figuratively. This Egypt can be read as either figurative or literal, because it happened literally, as Pastor Odimba brought it out in his document, but it also, Egypt is also a figure, could be read figuratively as well. Let's continue on reading on page 52. The dispersal of priests and pilgrims from Zimbabwe. Now, the priest of Golan, or in Golan in the local dialect, contemporary Angola, took three directions: north towards Kinshasa, the capital of Democratic Republic of Congo; center towards Kasai, with Buzi-Mayi as the priestly center in Congo; east towards Uganda, where the Hyksos and other Black Bantu communities came to after moving along the Nile from Nubia. The priest who took the third direction gave this country, which occupies this region of the African Great Lakes, the name Uganda, in remembrance of the camp of Moses in the desert. Of Numbers 33-32, Deuteronomy 10:6-7, these priests formed Ujilia, currently Ujiji, in northern Tanzania, currently Tanzania, as a priestly center after Luanda. Pastor Odimba goes on to state, quote, Ugelia later fell to the Assyrians in the 17th century AD and became a slave trade post called Ujiji in Tanzania. The Orthodox priest who escaped the massacre migrated toward the hills of Rwanda, where an important priest colony was set up. They were called Hutu because of the mountainous nature of the region of Rwanda and Burundi, which they chose. It refers to the town in the mountainous region of Judah, which is near Hebron. A priestly dynasty was then formed in Rwanda, dominated by an ultra-Orthodox Judaism, which was opposed to any penetration from the other religions, namely Islam and Catholicism. The center of Buzihara, currently Bujumbura, the capital of Burundi, was set up well before the 15th century. This center was reinforced by the runaway Jews after the devastation of Ugelia in Tanzania in the 17th century. It was in this country, Burundi, that the three stars, the emblem of David, which feature in the flag of this country, were discovered. These emblems lend credence to the presence of the Judiastic faith in this Judaistic faith of this continent. So here is the Star of David here, the pyramid, the two integrated pyramids. And you can see that same sign here. Here's one pyramid, and here's the other pyramid. And remember that this sign, I'm going to read what Pastor Odimba alerted us to, this, the symbol. On page 31, Pastor Odimba alerts us to the information that the sixth king of the dynasty, of the 24th dynasty, was Simon, the contemporary of David. This was the king who organized the extermination of all the Hamites together with David and then linked Egypt to Israel. This achievement of the dreams of David raised him to the status of great prince of Israel, just like Joseph. His victory was crowned with two inverted pyramids we call the Star of David. So his victory was crowned. The victory of exterminating all of the Hamites was crowned with two inverted pyramids that we call the Star of David, an Egyptian symbol of union between the two kings and their kingdoms, Egypt and Israel. Okay. So that's what the symbol, the King David symbol is. It means, it symbolizes the union between the two kings, the king of the and their kingdoms of Egypt and Israel. The King Solomon of the 21st dynasty and King David of Israel. So it was there where they discovered in Burundi, the three stars, the emblems of David, which feature in the flag of this country, were discovered. These emblems lend credence to the presence of the Judiastic faith on the continent of Africa. Buzi, whose name forms part of Buji Mayi in Kasai and Abuzi around the equator in the Democratic Republic of Congo, was a priest, supervisor of sacrifices, and the father of Ezekiel, in Ezekiel chapter 1, verse 3. Hurrah also came from Horah in 1 Chronicles 11, chapter 32. In the middle of the 19th century, Buzi Hurrah fell to the Germans, who overthrew the Hutu dynasty and formed another dynasty with the Tutsi. This new dynasty was for the Hamite shepherds who practiced cow worship. So in the 19th century, the Germans overthrew the Hutu dynasty and formed another relationship with the dynasty, with the Tutsi. And this new dynasty was for the Hamite shepherds who practiced cow worship. So the Germans were in consolidation with the Hamite Tutsis. At the end of this victory, the latter sang a song describing the invasion and the raid of the Tutsi nomads in Rwanda following the victory of the Germans and the nomad shepherds over the sedentary Bantus or Hutu, which brought an end to the Judiastic in this part of the African continent. Rwanda is the last This song, which was translated into French by Reverend Father Alex Kagame, was criticized by Theodore Papadopoulos in his book entitled, it's in French, the poetry of the dynastic poetry of Rwanda. What followed then was the consolidation of the practice of cow worship, which for a long time was suppressed by the Hutu priest. And we know this cow worship is also evident in the culture of the Hindu, the Indian Hindu people. The rest of the priests of Buzi went to join their co-religionists of Mount Gilgal, currently Kigali, the capital of Rwanda, to form a priestly state, which is a reflection of Luanda, capital of Angola, a priestly town of the West, which we discussed earlier. The names Rwanda, Luanda, Lunda, and Maunda, which are spread out in Central Africa, were sacerdotal centers and have the same meaning as the word Judah in Hebrew, which means God be praised. This approach to formulating religious names of inspiration explains in general why the Hutus of Rwanda and Burundi have names that refer to God. Imana in Hutu language, such as Akizi Imana, Hiberya Imana. Rwanda is the last priestly center known to the writers of contemporary history. It is by virtue of its isolation in the hills and its distance from the coast that this country was able to keep its monotheistic religion, Orthodox Judaism, until the German conquest in 1853. So it's just another slide to continue to familiarize students with the different race, the different lineages, the Semitic Black race and the Hamitic Black race. Here you have the second president of Rwanda. He is an ethnic Hutu. And here is the fourth president of Rwanda, who is a Tutsi, born to a Tutsi family in southern Rwanda. And you can look at the features and see the difference between the two races of people. Now, when we talk about this German conquest of 1853 that Pastor Odimba alerts us to, the conquest that Orthodox Judaism was in this country and kept this practice until the German conquest. And I want to go into a little bit of background about this German conquest. You have this article that is online if you're interested. German Rwanda, the overlooked role of Germany in the centralization of authority in Rwanda from the 1890s to 1919. It states here that often downplayed by most historians, this image displays the prolific impact German East Africa held on the communities within the protectorate's borders. Although only a handful of white faces show the direct impact of imperial forces, the militarized Africans under the direction of their foreign occupants speaks volumes to the socio-political power wielded by Germany. Now, in this article, I'm just going to quote information that I found interesting. I'm just going to highlight a few of the information that I found interesting. In terms of the German exploration, it reads, quote, Rwandan government as having a permanent tradition of Tutsi centralized authority. A permanent tradition of Tutsi or Hamitic centralized authority, tied their vested authority to the theories of North African racial superiority. So we want to go into this Hamitic hypothesis, and like we were discussing before about the philosophical arguments, the ideologies that men have to come up with in order to justify or legitimize their reign of terror. So it tied their vested authority to the theoretical, ideologies of North African racial superiority, known as the Hamitic hypothesis. In fact, this hypothesis suggested that the Tutsi population derived from the lost tribe of Ham during the Jewish exodus from Egypt. This dualistically implies that Tutsi came from a separate religious and economic class, and they are racially Caucasian, which genetically predetermined them to lead. In the next section, a culmination of factors, this author, Mr. Timothy Barrett, he states, quote, in order to understand how this newly formed German protectorate forced centralization within Rwanda, the answer revolves around Bismarck's call for a minimalist style administration. In order to achieve this, the colonial administration turned to the observations made by Baumann and Goltzen to lay out their plan for governmental control. Both explorers held a deep reverence for the Hamitic hypothesis, and their writings imply that the most direct form of control came from co-opting existing ethnic/economic polarizations. Now, here again, explorers being governed by an ideology. Oftentimes we may think, oh, these people that committed all these atrocities, were just a bunch of ignorant, no, they were governed and driven by ideologies, by arguments, philosophical arguments, hypotheses even, theories that justifies their behavior, that soothes the conscience. And so this is proof and more information and evidence about the power of science and the importance of coming up with theories and intelligent theories and hypotheses and ideologies that promote the peace of humanity and that promote unity and prosperity and health and wealth and well-being, and not destruction, demise, and terrorization of the planet. I mean, we need to do research and come up with theories that support the planet and the health of the planet and the general well-being of humanity, not theories that legitimize rape, pillage, and pillage and destruction, enslaving people, kidnapping people from their, putting them in perpetual slavery. This is what their Hamitic hypothesis justifies. Evil science. This is your science that's coming from the wicked, as the Bible, the language is used in the Bible, the wicked. They have their science now. And where is the science of the righteous? That's my question. Here's your Hamitic hypothesis. Mr. Barrett goes on to continues to state that the new colonial administration concluded that in order to reaffirm the socioeconomic power structures that define Bugiri's Rwanda, in this case, it was called the Ubertwa patron-client system. An unchallenged centralization of authority needed to happen while the kingdom remained in a German protectorate. Now listen to this. This is very interesting. In order to execute this idea, Germany used two approaches: physical force and, here it is, religion. And go back and check out, I might do a series on a very quick series on religion and the role of religion in the West, in Western civilization. But don't sleep on this. The religion is a tool of the oppressors. Religion is a tool of the enslavers. Religion is a tool of the capitalists, the wicked, as the Bible refers to them as. And so they know, he said, physical force and religion. Now, it goes on to read, Mr. Timothy Barrett goes on to state that, quote, coinciding with this militancy, Germany expanded. We're talking about Pastor Odimba, how the German conquest brought the Judaistic practices of the Rwandan, of the Hutu people to an end. This is what it looked like in real time. Coinciding with this militancy, Germany expanded the social aspects of control through the Catholic Church when it sent Bishop John Joseph Hirth of the Missionaries d'Afrique, White Fathers, to establish missions in Rwanda. Since the Hamitic theory's foundation relied so heavily on Christian rhetoric, this made the acceptance of Christianity pivotal to the control of the Germans established. Initially, both the Hutu and Tutsi populations rejected the Catholic Church, but the White Fathers quickly won acclaim from the impoverished and patronless as they offered them nourishment, medical assistance. So here, we are going into the Hamitic hypothesis. Now it states here, Mr. Barrett states that quickly, quote, quickly won acclaim from the impoverished and patronless as they offered them nourishment, medical assistance, and most importantly, protection. Okay. The church offered these benefits with the intention of converting the population. Despite the overt reasons for their actions, many Hutu grew warm to the missionaries. However, with the conversion of the Hutu population, they tacitly accepted the Christianized racial categories as well, which included the acceptance of Tutsi authority. Okay, so here we can see once again the ideology that fuels their aggression, known as the Hamitic hypothesis. It goes on to state here that since the missionaries played such a pivotal role in the education of the Hutu population, they indisputably used this educational tactic of social control over the population, which only widened the divide within Vanda. In conclusion, he states that several historians point to the small numbers within the colonial administration as evidence of a nearly non-existent imperial force. But one must answer, who suppressed challenges to the throne and who legitimized racial authority? So here we have, as he already, alluded to, that the legitimization of the conquest states, the legitimization of the conquering nation, the ideology that there must be an ideology that legitimizes the reign of the colonizers, or that legitimize, and sometimes, oftentimes with the Hamitic race, it is in the form of racial authority, and this idea that they are born to lead because of their race. Also, in conclusion, it states that Mwami's economic system of Overthrow caused the poverty that made the Hutu population rely on the Catholic Church for aid and coerced acceptance of their religiously based ethnic divisions. So religiously based ethnic divisions, again, this Hamitic hypothesis. This system of this economic system he addresses in this article, that an economic system that causes poverty. So, we're dealing with, these systems of oppression, the science of oppression, the science of domination and control. And but just as there is a science of oppression, there is also a science of freedom and liberation, and a science of peace. And so we are about exploring and investigating and coming and bringing to the table the science that confronts and opposes their evil and wicked science. And part of that is studying. Part of that science of oppression, the science that will oppose the wicked science, is studying and research and investigation. We'll leave you with this final word found in Proverbs chapter 16, verse 16 by King Solomon. How much better is it to get wisdom than gold, and to get understanding? It's rather to be chosen than silver. Peace and blessings to all who love the truth. And ye shall know the truth, and the truth shall make you free. Thank you for your time. Happy studying. Love you.